ensuring that we're cremating at least as many as we're taking in, or understanding when we're out of balance. Because that causes a cascading effect that like once you break and go, like once our fridge gets too crowded, cremations, we found like once they're more than the fridge is at 90% capacity, physically moving things around and cremating efficiently, the cremations go from 20 a day to 16, dramatically less. All of a sudden we have a huge problem that compounds on itself and you're constantly digging out of a hole. So my thought was, how do we put in barriers to make sure this never happens?
Welcome to the Direct Cremation Podcast with your hosts, Tyler Yamasaki and Will Michaelis.
Hi, and thank you for joining us on the Direct Cremation Podcast. I'm your host, Will Michaelis, funeral home consultant and former manager of the Omega Society, a cremation brand that at its peak served over 4,500 families per year. As always, I'm here with my co-host, Tyler Yamasaki, CEO of Parting Pro. And again, as always, you can find links to both of our products and services down below. Today's guest is a repeat guest with a lot of great experience to draw on. He helped streamline Omega's operations and procedures. It was quite the undertaking, and we worked through it. Today, we're going to find out what he measured to ensure the health of our company. Welcome, my brother, Drew Michaelis.
Hey, guys.
Welcome to the podcast, Drew.
Drew.
Good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Let's hop right in. Drew, tell us about yourself and how you got into this industry. And, you don't have to pull any punches. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I came from a totally different background, similar, I think, to like Tyler and what you guys did at Parting. So I started in public accounting at EY, worked there for a few years, and also acted as a consultant for some financial services firms. So very much like a finance guy, accounting guy. And then I took a job at Harry's, a really cool startup, in 2015 and worked in their customer experience team, where I really learned a lot about building business, startup, DTC worlds. And I had a very cross-functional role. I was dealing with customers, managing a lot of people, and cross-functionally sharing a lot of data, and really honed my skills, I think, on the operations side and people side, which I really liked. And then from there, I moved to California. I think it was really just a personal decision more than a financial decision. Didn't have a job lined up, just knew I wanted to live a different life than New York City. And from there, that's where you and I synced up, Will, obviously. And after a few months, decided like that Omega was actually really interesting. That was a family business of ours, but something that I hadn't considered as much until then. And I was right around 30. So it's kind of that like early career, kind of taking a step back and thinking, what do I want to do? And really thought the problems were interesting at Omega. And it was a really great business and much more people heavy than I thought, a little more caring. And so we joined up in early 2019. And from there, had some great success. Yeah.
You mentioned problems were interesting. What were you focusing on at Omega? What was your role?
You mean like what problems did I find interesting when we were exploring working together at Omega?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that the problems that I saw, I don't think the industry sees as much. Some do. The problems I saw were the things that were totally unaddressed when we would talk. When I would talk with my aunt and with Will about the business, it was like, they're not leveraging any technology, and they don't seem to be aware of much technology out there. I think the big project that was starting at that time was integrating Parting Pro. And that to me was like, oh, so they're somewhat open to it, but they haven't fully leveraged this. They don't have like big products and big names in the industry. So this seems like something that could be really optimized. Like the problem that you solve in the funeral home, to me, problems should make the business better, which usually has to have the customer at the core. So it was very much like problems that would improve customer experience around something that's really sensitive and impacts everyone. And I thought that was really noble cause and something interesting and moving, as opposed to selling a product that makes it easier to shave or easier to buy tickets online or a better suitcase. Like this was actually impacting human beings in a real way.
Nice, man. Nice. You mentioned that some people in the industry, we didn't see things that you saw, that you believe were important. How does that factor into your overall impression of the funeral industry when you started?
It seemed that what I envisioned was like all these professionals around the country to some degree, especially the mom and pop shops, were operating the way they'd operated since 1990 or 2000. And I came from a workforce that was every single new thing we did usually had some software attached to it. Like, oh, we've got an easier way to do payroll. We signed up with a new software. Oh, now you're CRM software. We found a better one. So we implement it. Every team had multiple softwares, messaging, communications, all based around really efficient workflows and removing like searching and finding things, just having things automated and much more easy to execute. So you create a lot of efficiency. And I thought, to me, I was like, well, that's a huge win because that makes your life a lot easier as an employee. And that always trickles down to the customer. So I just thought it was a win-win and really easy to see those changes and start trying to implement things. Or obvious, not easy. It actually was not easy, but they seemed obvious.
That's a good distinction. It was all a lot harder. It was all obvious and a lot harder than it actually was to execute.
Yeah. Change is hard for any team, especially small teams that have been operating privately for so long. You're kind of isolated, so they're not used to change as much. So Parting Pro was a huge project for Omega Will. I know that took a long time just to get pushed through, but we saw on the back end what it did was like singularly the biggest technology that we lost Will. That was like the biggest technology implementation we did. And it also saved us the most time and money, gave us a lot of time back to help like address calls, address emails, communicate better internally and externally. So we became like much more tightly, a tighter operation once we started mastering it.
So Drew, as someone who came into the funeral profession or came into death care, not from death care, not growing up in the funeral home, what was your first impression of Omega Society when you saw it?
My first impressions actually were, well, let me think about this. I think there was like, I'm just going to take you through my thoughts because initially it was like you're coming from a startup and going to a small business. So immediate visible things were like office is totally different. You're going from a big clean office to like small business office. Funeral homes, I think if you've been in them, have like a certain vibe. And we very much had like that office kind of comforting vibe, but also had a crematory, so warehouse. So adjusting like to the physical space is huge for me because I'm not used to that. I think sitting down and learning the job, I realized that there were no materials really on how to train people. It was in person, side by sides with various people on the team. So, right away, I'm like, okay, there's no formal learning. That's a huge opportunity once I get a grasp of this. And I think really my early days were just learning the job and observing like, oh, we print a lot of things here as opposed to emailing. And some of these things are necessary, and as I'm going through, I'm trying to learn and identify like opportunities to make things more efficient because I immediately also got the impression how much volume there was. We were doing 250 a month and understanding like when there was an easy day in the office where it felt easy and less admin work. What did our metrics look like? And what did they look like when we were having a crazy day? What were the triggers that were breaking the system? It seemed like the system had worked up to like a point and we had gone beyond that and needed a new system. So I was starting to plan those things and just observe the complexity and see how everything played together.
Yeah. How would you say it was different in dealing with coworkers when you came into death care versus working at Harry's in terms of maybe like the mindset or how they viewed business?
Yeah. I think what's very similar is that, at a company that's young, like a startup with a lot of free money, venture capital, you are used to nice things and you hire people that have to also have a cultural fit that's very big in young companies. And I thought there was also a clear culture at Omega. I think everyone cared deeply about their work. They believed their work was either making the company better, which is more of a Harry's thing. And on Omega's side, it was helping families, like truly being good human beings, almost like a nonprofit type of emotional approach. And I think what's different is that young folks prioritize workplace experience a lot and really put themselves first a lot and voice those concerns. Small business, you're not used and don't have the budget for those accommodations to make you like the best chairs, the best office, the best coffee for free in the office, all these small things. But on the other side, like people worked really, really hard, and there was a lower expectation, I think, on the small business side for people to take meetings just to talk about ideas. They were more focused on execution than ideas and business growth. They were focused on there's a task at hand. It's always an immediate need. And they're in that cycle of constantly helping families who have an acute problem, and less on the business growth. That's more like in the ownership management side of things. So it was interesting to see it siloed. I think the communication styles were just different. Like startups share big meetings. Everyone's rah, rah, rah. Funeral home experience on my end was very much more like daily execution, constant daily execution.
Yeah.
To start.
Yeah. It's a big difference. And to even see you recognize it and educate me on the difference was really eye-opening for me, and just speaks to like any environment that you're in, you can become nose blind, for lack of a better word. You're just you're in it, and you don't.
Yes.
You don't know. You don't know.
I think that, one thing you got to be careful of is coming in and just thinking you know best and like saying, we need to change this, this, this. So all these thoughts are happening silently over the first like few months as I get to know the place. And I think also like if you were to say, here's Uber or Harry's who reached a multi-billion-dollar valuation, some startup, and you want to take all the things they did and copy it and put it in your funeral home, it's not going to work. It's a different business completely. The customer needs are different. The process is different. The services are different. And so I was trying to understand, like, what do I need to keep and care about and what isn't going to work for the workers or the customer, and try to find that balance before really starting to make changes. I think that's important. I don't think a funeral home is always going to be serving families in a very delicate time. I think it's just, for me, I always thought about what happens behind closed doors and how do we make that better? That where's that barrier so you can do things more easily when it's not customer facing, and then thinking customer facing, okay, how do we manage that experience too?
Could you maybe go over that process then of how you analyze what was, like, let's say you were to come into a funeral home today.
Yeah.
And what would be your kind of playbook to making the operations better in a funeral today?
So again, observing a lot. I think you got to understand everyone in the building, what they do, and almost like understand in your head what they're doing and where they're physically going to be moment to moment. In our office, I had never experienced this. We've got phones at our desks. We have tasks that are on the computer and tasks that are real life in person. The work office was upstairs. Customers were downstairs. So there's a lot of up and down and immediate needs. So you're trying to reach people. Someone's on the phone for this coworker. They're not at their desk. So like understanding where people are, when and why are they at their desk or not at their desk. And then from there, figuring out like, really, it goes back to like office space. Like, what do you do here? Okay. Like, what are you actually doing? And then I try to understand and estimate how much time does that take a normal person, understand some sort of utilization and flexibility in there, right? Like they're actually doing 4 hours of death certificate work in an 8-hour day. However, they're also being asked to do X, Y, Z. How does that work? I tried building like the optimized process for each role, Tyler, is what I would say. It's like understanding teams and then individuals and where the process is breaking. Where do things repeatedly cause issues? Like we had so many ad hoc processes, and I was trying really hard. I think like it's kind of like a convenience store, like you walk in, there's no bathroom, and it's a 500 candies and like the one thing you need. That was like a funeral home. It was like overly complex and very small, like high volume. And I'm just like, I feel like you need to simplify the processes to like X, Y, Z for everybody and create these uniform expectations to create a more efficient workplace. So I started with like, what are people doing? behind the scenes and how do we grease the wheel, so to speak, to get that moving faster. Because really crematories are an in-out operation. 300 cases, you receive 300 cases. The answer to that problem is how do you cremate and serve all of those families effectively in a 30-day period? And how do you make it faster so you can do 350, 400, 500?
After going through that process and identifying those things, what did you find were the most important things to measure?
So my most, I guess, obvious, speaking of our experience at Omega, so we're talking about single location, 4 retorts, 15, 20 people. I did the quick math on if you ran these machines, how many cremations could you do in a month running like 24/7 and working backwards from that. And then I created a maximal, like in this building with what we've got, forget how many people we need to hire and factor in some time for like repairing these machines for being overworked. How much work could you get out of this business? How much could you squeeze out? And the number was like, we were operating as a really large provider with like 3,500 cremations, 3,000 at the time, 30% utilization on those machines, meaning they weren't operational 60% of the time. And so I thought about expanding hours, and then that was blocked operationally, right? So really it came down to the big KPI for me is finding the crematory log sheet and looking at and understanding the biggest problems in our day internally came from our end of day meeting when it was how many bodies do we have in-house? That backlog of people want them to be cremated. They're here taking up space in our fridge. How fast can we get those back to families, those folks back to families? And that number, it's just I counted it as days per cremation or days in-house. Mm-hmm. That number was like 5.5 when we started, which I assumed was very low because we were so large and efficient. And I thought, okay, every half day you get off that, you get hundreds of more cases per year capacity, or a lot more efficient downtime to just have the employees execute on the finer points to get our Google review rating up. So either way, to me, it was either we're growing and able to embrace that growth or improving the customer experience. Ideally, kind of both mixed together as we go. Yeah. Days per cremation.
Okay. Well, to go on to some of the more technical KPIs and numbers that you were tracking, like what were some of the perpetual numbers that you always were looking at to maintain the health of Omega Society?
Yeah, I think like on a daily basis, we would always track number of new cases and number of cremations to make sure that there's we're managing the in and out. That's another way to measure what the days per cremation is, really just ensuring that we're cremating at least as many as we're taking in, or understanding when we're out of balance. Because that causes a cascading effect that once you break and go, once our fridge gets too crowded, cremations, we found, once they're more than the fridge is at 90% capacity, physically moving things around and cremating efficiently, the cremations go from 20 a day to 16, dramatically less. All of a sudden we have a huge problem that compounds on itself and you're constantly digging out of a hole. Mm-hmm. So my thought was, how do we put in barriers to make sure this never happens, or work out of backlogs immediately so that it doesn't cascade? Because it would take, looking at Omega's reviews, you'd see periods of where they're really busy business-wise, their ratings would go down online. And then they would come up again once they weren't so busy, because you couldn't deliver on the customer experience because you're just in this backlog. Everyone's busy. So I wanted to remove those issues in the office so that everyone can be on phones, friendly, nice, not stressed, ready to help people with their best selves.
So were those kind of the two major ones that you looked at? Just how many cases were coming in every day, and then the days it would take to cremate.
So not to get into too much complexity, but just think about a week. We operated 5 days a week. 2 days we're not operating. Okay, so that's more than 20% of the week. Nothing's getting done. So you have to do all this work in 5 days. So usually it was usually we'd have to outpace the number Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to be able to leave on Fridays and say we have enough capacity for Monday again. So it's managing this like day to day, but also week to week, in and out. I could make a list of like 40 KPIs. They're all derivations of like 2 or 3, and it's really in and out. And days to cremate tells me how long it took us to really file a death certificate, talk to the family, resolve every single issue, get payment, and then cremate them. So all of those major pieces have to fall into place fast to happen. So that was my North Star. Really simple, really easy. When it got out of whack, I measured this on a monthly basis. So it was a little longer because those are larger trends. But when it gets out of whack, you can start to dig in and say, like, is it the paperwork and families? Is it the payments that are the issue? Maybe we raise prices, people aren't paying as fast. Maybe it's our pickup process. So trying to understand operationally what we need to change. It all kind of comes from that and gives us a good idea of if we're on track to keep getting more efficient, driving that number down. This check on that for me is very simple. Customer experience. I just think, what are they saying on Google and Yelp? If our reviews are we getting the right volume and the right feedback? I want our star rating to stay high. So we had like 700 by the end when we sold it. It was at 40 when we started. So we got tons of reviews in the meantime, all very good. And then ad hoc emails, we agreed as a team, we'd all share. So I had access to the team customer service email inbox, and any folks who maybe didn't write a bad review or good review, they would send feedback there, and I would aggregate that too to make sure we're not squeezing our efficiency. I'm not trying to get to like, one day cremations 100%. Great for business, probably terrible for people because you're hounding them and forcing them to make all these decisions too fast. So we're trying to find that balance.
Could you maybe give me some metrics that you were tracking on the, like maybe the arrangement process?
So every time you manage or measure something, it ends up being something you optimize. And so I was really careful not to overly analyze too much of this, but just get direct signal or approximate signal on these things. Because like I was saying, like it's hard to enact change. And in our team, I didn't want to give them too much and just become this ruthless like metrics guy. I knew it was hard to sell that too much. So I would just look at Parting Pro has pretty good data. I liked looking at, and really what I would do is scan once a day or once a week and just get an idea of like how long is it taking for us to start a case and get all of the forms in that we need. Every single thing, not just the core paperwork, next of kin authorization, anything else required, advanced healthcare directives. And what I ended up doing is and I tried various avenues. First, I tried empowering employees to manage this themselves. And then I thought it was actually easier to tell every family the same thing crystal clear every time to meet the objectives. So my numbers were, I want days to cremation, days in-house, under 5 days, dropping it a half day for the first year. That's how I thought about this. And then I thought, well, biggest delay is what I was told by the team. It was doctors signing off on death certificates. They have their own laws. Doctors are not supposed to hold this up. It should be impossible if they follow the law. It's like 16 hours after death, they have everything done. However, we weren't getting paperwork in. So the root cause was actually paperwork was delayed because we had a really poor communication and setting expectations for each family. So I had changed the paperwork to explicitly state deadlines that would allow us. So 48 hours from the time a passing occurs, all paperwork and payment have to be done. That removes all the blockers that we have. If we can set that expectation, 80% are probably good citizens and we'll march to that drum and do that. We've helped ourselves immensely with zero work. And then the other 20% that can't or don't, they'd be a problem anyway. And we focus all of our attention on those folks because we made our lives easier over here. So that's how I tried to break it down to really get things moving. And we saw, again, like as I would see over time, changing the paperwork or communicating to the team how to talk to families, that time to collect payment and see that easily in Parting Pro and see all the paperwork and seeing that on a screen. It's not a real KPI, but it's like a gut check, a sniff test that tells me what I need to know.
I think dovetailing on that, one of the things that we did that was huge was assigning responsibility and accountability for specific arrangers for each case. That made them responsible for that family's customer experience and then allowed us to figure out what the arranger's capacity is on a monthly basis to see like how your workload is actually balancing out among your team. And if you do that analysis and you find one of your arrangers is helping 50 families and everyone else is averaging 30, you double click on them and say, what are you doing? That happened with us. We found that two of our arrangers were actually doing double the casework. And it turns out that they were using our new phone system with text messaging and handling a lot of families via text because that was their preferred way of communicating. So they just used and leveraged the technology at their disposal, gained in efficiency, and based on the KPIs we had, we figured out that they were outperforming everyone, which allowed us to figure out what they're doing and tell everybody else.
That's a great point. Yeah, we did. And this goes back to like KPIs that I didn't share. I found that, again, if you start sharing numbers, the wrong numbers, you optimize for it. And what I was worried about is we would break down per month how many cases each person would handle, right? Who are they assigned? You create some accountability, let that set in. That had its own benefit for 3 to 6 months, just understanding like this is your case, soup to nuts. We did have a separate person deal with death certificate filing, but other than that, it was you dealing with paperwork, payment, and communicating with the family. So you knew who was on your roster. Much better experience for customers, much better experience for workers coming in and knowing who they need to talk to and who they need to send to someone else. And we found a big difference in efficiency. There were people, so we measured cases per month, revenue total, and revenue per case, just to get some clarity on the money. I wanted to see if, again, the people who were doubling their cases had half the revenue, right? Or were just not giving families options, not providing good experiences. I also tied this into individual Google reviews. So if it was your case, it would get tied to you and you had a star rating, like a Uber driver.
Right.
So just to give us the quality and volume picture together. So on an individual side, but I never shared that with people because if I did, some of our best workers weren't that efficient. They were not tech savvy. However, they were crucial in certain situations, especially they were experts on certain things that we needed them on our team. So every team's different. I don't think you need to have every person be the same skill set and good at one thing. I think having a blend is very important. But it was interesting to see that really we had some folks like probably 30 to 40% more effective on the volume side and revenue. They were hitting the same revenues, more volume. They were just faster.
Right.
Providing great service. Those are the people you want. So it's what are they doing right? And also what are their skill sets? What do we need to look for to find another one of those?
Were there any personal goals that you would set or KPIs that you would set for your funeral directors?
I think we said we wanted an average of 4.8 star experiences or higher and to expect getting 2 cases a day, 10 a week. I think about half our team actually hit the volume. That's dependent on whether we're busy enough. But we generally were. So we kind of were loose on it. But the stated expectations, we didn't hold anyone strictly to this because I think it can really deteriorate. And in the environment we were in, which is small, it's very visible when things start to upset people. And that can spread culturally very fast. So I wanted to avoid that. Like if I were a large operator, like larger, like I owned 50 funeral homes and out of one HQ, then I would think about this more like numbers and start to give everyone, and this is what SCI does, I believe, is like you have expectations and numbers you have to hit. And we did not do that because it changes people's tone on the phone. It changes how they think about their job. And our X factor was they actually care about people they're talking to. And at the end of the day, really, like I said at the beginning, they really want to deliver for families and not have to be worried about getting punished for not hitting a number that I made up. I just track the number. And if we're off target, I push a little bit gently for the whole group or individually, but I don't state it like this is part of your job in order to stay here. You have to do this. I just set those goals and see who could hit them and see who couldn't, and then try to manage that gently.
Cool.
We didn't have investors. So when you work for a VC-backed firm, like you have investors, that's why you're there. And not having investors, small business, you have the luxury to just, I think, play more to your people. I think at the end of the day, like teams are valuable and they're not easily replaced. especially when you're small. So I'd rather have people that are engaged in the job and care than just ruthlessly optimizing things.
So I know that you kind of came in, you obviously have the last name of the family. You were probably brought in into a position of quote unquote power to be able to enact change to the team, right? Like what you said, it probably held a lot more weight than if someone they just hired came in to like make that change, right? A big thing that we see from, in working with different teams across the country is a lot of times you'll see team members that kind of get to do their own thing, right? And turnover's high. Finding good help is often hard or difficult. So what would you say is an effective way to enact change to get people, using a certain software or to following a certain process when that's not, what they're really comfortable with?
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good question. I think to start, I think it's unfair to ask anything of someone that you can't do yourself. And that if you're a manager, you have not put tools in place to allow them to gain the skills they need to achieve it, if that makes sense. There's usually a skill gap when you're talking about people operating in silos, doing their own thing. It means they're using it as a crutch to say, I don't want to learn anymore and I just want to retire knowing what I know. And that's fine.
It's a good point.
That's really what it is. There's also just people who don't care about the job, I guess, or don't want to grow. I think really the incentive, you have to understand individual motivators here. Every person's really different. And if you try to motivate everyone the same way, it'll leave some people unmotivated and some people very motivated, but you'll lose people. So I always try to think on the individual level. How do I, I'm a relationships person. How do I create a good relationship? What do they need from me as a person in the family? I think the only advantage I had was I was Will's brother. Will had clout, but I had to earn my stripes in there, taking hits on phones, doing cases, asking for help a lot, not knowing a lot. So again, that's why I tried to hold my tongue until I really at least understood the business and knew I could bring objective opinions about things that had nothing to do with the funeral industry and more to do with business. And they were that this was I would give business opinions rather than funeral first opinions, I think, to start. But when you're trying to motivate a team where some people are just kind of sitting there and they know they've got leverage on you as an owner because it's hard to hire, that's really tough. I think you have to really value people and try to get to the root cause of there's probably fear there and trying to provide them comfort and also support. I think it's going to cost money. And I don't think a lot of owners are willing to pay for that and develop their employees. Another way to do this whole industry is kind of how call centers work, but I think at $1,000 to $25,000 ticket, you could just overpay $75K a year salary plus health and benefits. You'll get the best cremation specialists in the world doing that, pulling them out of other jobs, I think. And they'll be I think about our two rock stars at Omega, those folks, I'd pay a lot more to get 10 of those folks. They could handle the volume of a normal team of 30, really. Right. And I'd rather have 10 good ones. So part of it's also understanding and I didn't look for talent inside the funeral home industry. I think the pay and the work itself makes a lot of people not want to stay or not want to look at it. But there are a lot of people with really good skills that I think could earn a really good living working in the industry, especially on the cremation side where it's less technical. It's more human based.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the motivating a team and, you've got ages, right? You've got young, older folks there who've been in there forever. I think one thing I tried to do was everyone had a core role that only took up 50%, 60% of their time. And the other time I tried to guide them on what's going to be motivating to them so they buy into the other parts, right? An old school funeral person doesn't want to be doing parting pro. Well, if I give them special responsibilities in the funeral space, but say to get this time, you have to be savvy at this, they'll see it as a blocker to something they want.
Yeah.
We did that.
Yeah, we use those tactics a lot. What trends are you excited about in the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's, trends. I immediately think of where the new ideas, I think a lot of them can come or are more visible when they come from startups and funded companies. So, technology that makes funeral directors' lives easier, things that create an easier experience for people. A lot of them are things that I think are tangential to the funeral industry and not directly funeral related.
Yeah.
So afterlife care. You basically got a bunch of notaries and living will folks that are doing like the whole will and a trust thing, advanced healthcare directives. I mean, directly in the industry, Parting Pro and those software tools that make funeral directors more effective at their jobs so they have more time to talk to people if needed is good. There's always been a focus on customer experience in the funeral industry. I think CRM lines up with that. I think being anything that makes the workplace more effective lines up with that. I don't see that as a big trend. I see like cremation and taking advantage of direct cremation as a trend. Tulip, all these startups that create like very unique death experiences, funeral experiences. I think those are exciting. I don't think any of those carry a lot of weight in terms of volume and like a trend becoming the norm and meaningfully changing things. No, I don't see that. I think it's kind of the same thing we've been doing. This is a hard industry to change. And I think that makes sense given what we're dealing with. But, I think the biggest change is stuff that may happen silently with slow adaptation of technology. You'll see funeral homes working more effectively. And hopefully we'll see, I think, a little less price disparity and price gouging going on, I think, and also better consistent service. The service quality is so inconsistent across the industry, even though it's licensed, registered, regulated. So I think where cremation places win is where they focus on internally and reflect that externally. We're efficient, we're trustworthy, we're not here to upsell you. That gets you bigger business and an easier business to manage, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And I like the way you answered about the trends, because you kind of weave that into an answer for what you think death care looks like in 10 years too. Like who those winners are, who those losers are.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like I think ultimately economics drive a lot of this, and the customer tends to be driving whether they know it or not. And people just aren't willing to pay what they want, what they were paying for before, because they don't need a Catholic service. They don't need a funeral. Or they think $10,000 is a crazy expense. They can't afford it because the world's very expensive. And we saw this all the time. When you get to volume, you see small trends in batches of 60 to 80, and it becomes very obvious. So the amount of people who don't have money and are very clear about not spending it on this sort of thing is quite high. And I think there's also people with money who don't want to do it either. Plenty of them. The expectation is, I think the ideal 80%, 60 to 80% of our families were happiest when it was one phone call, paying the invoice online and picking up the remains and having almost no contact with us and doing everything at home, just handling getting the death certificates to them and getting the cremation done within one work week. That was like our happiest customer. And what I think the vast majority of people want. It's less exciting. It's not something you'd write an news article about and put on some ad to like drum up business. It's just like very, very simple stuff. And that all goes back to days in house. How long does it take you to do this cremation, soup to nuts? Yeah. That's what you're really trying to manage. If you can get that down and keep them happy, you win. You're a machine.
Expectations managed and delivered. Yeah.
I'd also like to see, the upselling stuff is just so cheesy to me. It feels like getting a car, but it's like dealing with a person and mixing. It's business and it's very intimate. And I think that you have to understand that. I try to break down the wall and just say luckily we didn't have to upsell. We focused on customer experience and let that drive our success. And that did, because I said, I'm not here to sell you on anything. This is what we need to do. And we have plenty of other options I can talk you through, and let them drive, and people will tell you what they want. I'm just facilitating. I'd like to see that. I hate to call it a vibe, but that approach, the professionalism tone, that funeral director, that guy, let me tell you about our cremation options. Let me tell you about our casket. It's like, okay, I don't think anyone really wants that, or most people don't. I'm just approaching it in more human. How are you feeling? Is your family okay? These questions, and just trying to minimize, I think, any burden I put on them in the process. So I try to keep the process light for them. I take on all the hard work. I try to keep it light for them. that's the nicest thing I think I can do. That and charging fair prices. Like, it's very simple to me. Yep. One thing I didn't talk about, but I would add to my answer about like the future. So there's the battle of like the moneyed corporations kind of coming in and like eating up all the mom and pops, Foundation Partners Group and SEI. And so the mom and pops that are going to hold out are the ones that can like execute. And I think I look at like where they're losing tons of money in expenses and or shitty service. And like the call center metaphor is, it's not even a metaphor. Like, I feel like any services that can bake themselves in as a layer, like a CRM, but like all the telephony services, instead of ADP, go to someone that's a little more skilled and actually legally can talk. Basically outsource your funeral home counselors, I think is something that's going to happen or should. I think that way you can have these big operators stay in business or grow to a place. Same thing with like transport. It seems like so disjointed and silly to be that.
What are you up to nowadays?
I'm doing sports partnerships at a company that specializes with Olympic athletes. So I've been working part-time doing that, which is pretty fun. Mm-hmm. A lot of swimmers and like basically just part sponsors, sports sponsorships or events. And then I'm swim coaching, getting more into that. So I'm all certified. I coach a like senior national training group. Well, it's really just like a high school level training group trying to go to, kids who want to swim in college. Coaching them.
Nice.
Yeah.
So very similar to deathcare.
No, it's fun and it doesn't make money. But it is really cool. I enjoy it. So yeah.
All right. Well, Drew, thank you very much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure.
It's good to see you guys.
I think it's very good to hear someone talk about all the executional things that you can do to like, because we always talk about arrangements and we talk about, experience and family experience. But I think a lot of what we see is there's a certain level, I think, of experience. Like you can always optimize it and make it better and better and better. But once you hit a certain level of good experience for the family, what's really going to set you apart to be able to handle more and more is the internal operations of your business.
Yeah. I think that I would say that's a really good point. And I think Omega basically hit, like we were as close as we needed to be. I don't know what the actual number is to like keep a 5-star rating, but we were efficient enough. We just needed to expand hours and hire more people. I mean, that's really because we could scale. So yeah, it's the internal stuff. It's like making it smooth behind the scenes so that you can get 30 cases in a day, 50 or 10, and you're smooth sailing no matter what,
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, really appreciate you, Drew. As always, I am Tyler Yamasaki and with my co-host, Will Michaelis. I'll catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you ever want to know more, please find us at directcremation.com.